Okay, welcome back. And in this video, we're going to be covering the first part of Chapter 8, which is of the Rathus text, which covers two broad topics in psychology: motivation and emotion. Oftentimes, you sometimes in some courses in some universities you see these as whole separate courses, or sometimes even whole separate chapters. But for the sake of the Rathus text, they're combined together. So part one will be addressing motivation, and part two will address emotions. The two constructs are heavily related. Our emotions, our motivation kind of go hand in hand, but for the sake of this chapter, we'll break it into two parts. Um, and the first part will be a little bit longer. I'm just letting you know ahead of time we're going to cover quite a bit of ground with motivation, but the second video will most likely be shorter. So let's get into this. Here are sort of the goals, your goals for the chapter. You should be able to define motivation and different aspects of motivation, including things like needs, drives, and incentives. We'll look at a few different theories of motivation. Maybe you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs before. Maybe that rings a bell for you. That's one we'll take a look at. We'll also look at some of the biggest things that are motivating to human beings. First, we'll look at food, being hungry, and then we'll also look at sex and how that plays a role in motivation. We'll look at achievement motivation. Another area of one of the areas that really motivates people is achieving things. And then we'll switch gears and look at emotions. We'll look at how we express emotions, and then also some different theories about emotions. There are three sort of competing theories that we'll look at. Here are the truth or fiction questions for this chapter. Go ahead and pause the video and take a look at these. Maybe jot your answers down and kind of see what you think ahead of time. So go ahead and pause the video. Okay, welcome back. So here's a quick review from the last chapter. We looked at cognition, chapter 7. One of the topics we looked at was intelligence, and we looked at some of the different views that people have on intelligence in psychology. We looked at Gardner, Spearman, Sternberg, and we might have looked at some others, but these are the sort of the big three I think we talked about. And so how does Howard Gardner's views differ from Charles Spearman? Or how does it differ from Robert Sternberg? Go ahead and pause the video and jot some ideas down, and then come back when you feel like you've got a few ideas down, and we'll discuss. Okay, welcome back. So Howard Gardner, of course, was a proponent of multiple intelligences, meaning like we can express our intelligences in a number of different ways. In fact, I think his list up to this date is over 13 different ways of being intelligent. But I think like the scientific literature only accepts like 10 of them, maybe even that, maybe not even that. Whereas Spearman was a big proponent of just a singular intelligence known as G. Spearman might argue that, yes, there's other ways of expressing intelligence, but this ability G is kind of the underpinning of all things that we do based on intelligence. And Sternberg was also a believer of multiple intelligence like Gardner, except for he simplified it down to 3 rather than 8 or 10 or however many Gardner you want to look at. Sternberg only talked about 3. He talked about street smarts, book smarts, and creativity, sort of the trifecta: practical intelligence, creativity, and I'm having a tough time with the academic, excuse me, practical versus academic. I had a brain fart there, sorry. Okay, don't worry about this slide. This is a video I typically show my students in my online classes. If you're hearing this and you're in my online class, you'll probably watch it online. If you're hearing this and you're in my in-class, we'll probably watch this in class. So I'm going to skip past, and we're going to jump into motivation. So what is motivation? Well, motivation is a somewhat abstract concept in psychology. Motivation is not a construct that we can see or measure directly in the same sense that maybe I could see and measure your height. I can infer your motivation based upon your behaviors, but typically motivation is a construct in psychology that is used to explain how people differ and vary in the amount of time, energy, and effort they put into tasks. So I can infer that you, for example, are very motivated for this class. For example, if I notice, hey, you're turning in all your assignments, you're studying, you're asking questions, you're always doing good discussion posts or things like that, you're making good grades on the test, and you're showing up to class, we could infer motivation from those behaviors. Or conversely, if you weren't showing up to class and you were making poor grades and you weren't turning assignments in consistently, we could infer your motivation might be low for this class. One thing we need to specify though is there's no such thing as a lack of motivation. Typically, motivation is just the amount of energy. Sometimes it's all about where we place that energy. So people typically are not unmotivated in the sense that they have no motivation. They're motivated to do other things. So, for example, if you have a student who isn't turning in their work, the teacher might think, oh, the student is unmotivated. They don't care. Well, maybe they don't care. That might be true. But rather to say they're unmotivated, maybe they are more motivated by something else outside of the schoolwork, or they are more motivated to avoid the schoolwork. Motivation is there. It's just directed in a different direction. So when we're talking about motivation or motive, it is a hypothetical state. Sometimes we're motivated by needs, just our basic drives, thirst, sex, food, things like that are some of the basic needs that really are motivating to human beings. But we're also motivated by incentives. You would probably stop going to your job if there was no chance of a promotion, or, for example, they stopped paying you. We are incentivized, with school as well. If there was no diploma at the end or no chance of getting a better job or a better opportunity in life because of school, you would lose a lot of motivation for that if the incentives weren't there. So we're going to look at motivation initially kind of from an evolutionary perspective at first, looking at sort of needs and looking at instincts. Now, human beings, for example, we don't follow a lot of instinctual behavior, but that's not to say we don't follow any. Human beings are bound by some instinctive behaviors, but when we're talking about instincts, these are very much species-specific behaviors. Like human beings, we don't have the instinct of putting our head in the sand when we get scared, like an ostrich might, for example. That's very unique to that species. But it also instincts, as far as humans go, these are things that are inborn to us. We don't have to learn them. They're transmitted from offspring to child. They're not something that we are expressly taught. Babies, for example, have the instinct of, if they are even for a moment submerged underwater, babies will suck the air in and take a big gasp of breath automatically, instinctually, without having to be taught that. It's almost like the survival mechanism is sort of instinctual. According to psychologists like William James and William McDougall, human beings, we have instincts. Our instincts are geared towards socialization and towards survival. So, again, the baby who sucks in the breath, that's a survival mechanism. Whereas the baby who automatically smiles when they see their mother, that instinctual behavior of smiling at our loved ones would be social behavior. It's fostering social bonds. Another theory about motivation is called drive reduction theory. And essentially, when we have drives, like the drive for thirst, this leads to a state of deprivation where I'm thirsty, I need water. And so I need to satisfy that drive or that urge by drinking water, for example. And by doing so, this will bring me back to a state of homeostasis or balance in the body. And this could be applied to any other drive or urge that we have, food, money, shelter, sex, all those things like that. We're trying to get back to a state of equilibrium, a state of homeostasis. We are also motivated by stimulus. I think this is so true based upon how much we like to play with our cell phones. We as human beings really like to be stimulated. We like to have our minds and our time occupied by things. And there's a reason for this. We are sort of, for lack of a better term, hardwired to seek out new things, novel stimulation. This allows for us to explore our environments. It aids us in our ability to learn, and also our ability to thrive and survive as a species by trying to find out new things and grow because of our new knowledge. So, first truth or fiction question: getting away from it all and going on a vacation from all sensory input for a few hours is relaxing. I don't really like the way this one is worded, so write your answer down. Let me know what you think. Pause the video and come back when you have your answer. The answer is, in fact, fiction. And I'm a little confused on how they are wording this question, so I'm actually going to take a look at the PowerPoint real quick. Yeah, I think the point it's trying to make is that when we don't have sensory input, that we get kind of bored or even restless. So I think literally if we have no sensory input, yeah, that can be very unrelaxing, but I think a lot of people too, when they go on vacation, they stress a lot. You know, you go on vacation and you just worry about the vacation the whole time or worry about the work that you're missing. So I kind of interpreted that way at first, but you know, I think they're really focusing in on this all sensory input part. So the answer is in fact fiction. So it just depends on how you're kind of looking at this question, though. Another theory of motivation is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. According to Maslow, we are trying to reach the top of this sort of pyramid here by satisfying all of these lower needs, physiological needs like hunger, thirst, sex, sleep, things like that. Safety needs being like shelter, love, having friends and social bonds, esteem, feeling good about ourselves. And according to Maslow, once we fulfill these needs, we can achieve this top need known as self-actualization, where we are fulfilling our basic, our potential as a human being, or we're becoming the best versions of ourselves, according to Maslow. So that's one particular theory. Some other perspectives on motivation is a cognitive perspective, in that we, as human beings, through our mental abilities, we represent the world mentally. Through our thoughts and through our experiences, we create mental representations of the world. And according to theorists like Piaget, we are motivated to eliminate consistencies in our behavior. We want to make sure that the way we think and the way we behave are aligned with one another. And this gets a little bit into cognitive dissonance theory, which we'll talk about again in a later chapter. But sometimes when our behaviors and our beliefs or values don't match up, we kind of reach this crossroad where we have to decide. We either have to change our behaviors or change our beliefs or change our values to reflect that change. Okay, so quick comprehension check. In rank order, go ahead and list the following needs of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Try to put them in order. Pause the video. Go ahead and see what you think. Pause the video, write your answers down, and come back. Okay, so the first one, of course, would be hunger. So the bottom of our hierarchy, just imagine a pyramid here. We'd have hunger, then we'd move up safety, then social relations, which are friends, self-esteem, and then self-actualization at the top. So we can even go back and look at that if you want to double check. Here it is. Food, safety, friends, feeling good, and self-actualization. Okay. We are also motivated by, sorry, I don't know why that was there. We are motivated by hunger. One of the biggest things that motivates people is food. I mean, and it's even crazier now. We don't just eat food. We think about food all day, in the sense that we take pictures of our food and share it with each other. And that just shows you how motivated we are by food, I think. And this whole process of hunger, the motivation of hunger, begins with our digestive system. It begins when the mouth starts to salivate. When your mouth is salivating, that is the beginning of digestion. And it's also letting your body know, hey, I'm eating food. Food is also, this whole process, it starts with the mouth, digestive tract, your esophagus, etc., goes into the stomach. Other things that are involved in regulating your sense of hunger are your blood sugar levels. Also, you have receptor cells in the liver that let you know whether you're hungry or not. So, I mean, it's a biological event through and through. The hypothalamus is involved. You remember the hypothalamus is what regulates some of our basic needs, including hunger. Destruction of particular areas of the hypothalamus, particularly the ventromedial nucleus in the hypothalamus, could lead to hyperphagia, which I believe is excess eating. And then the lateral hypothalamus is sort of where we begin to, this is what starts us to feel hungry. Destruction of this part of the brain would actually lead to aphasia, which results in you don't feel hungry. So the brain, different parts of the brain are involved in different areas of eating. Here's another truth or fiction question. People feel hunger due to contractions in the stomach. Pause the video. What do you think? It's true. That's one of the biggest ways we know we're hungry. As soon as we start getting those contractions and pangs in our stomach, it's just letting us know it's time to eat. Your stomach will literally growl at you and let you know when it's time to eat. Here's a picture of a hyperphagic rat, a rat who had the ventromedial nucleus portion of their brain destroyed, and the result is an inability to stop eating. Sorry, my computer just froze up all of a sudden, so I can't go back to the picture. But here it is. Sorry, there it goes. As you can see, this rat looks more like almost like a baseball more than he does a rat. If you didn't have the face there, it might be hard to tell it was a rat. But food or hunger is not just a physiological event. There's also psychological elements involved. When we see or smell food, that sometimes it'll make us feel hungry even when we're not. Sometimes we eat when we're feeling depressed or anxious or even bored. We eat and we're not even hungry sometimes. There's also, the more sedentary we are, we're more likely to eat. There's a strong correlation between eating, weight gain, and sitting around. The more often we're sedentary and we're bored and we're not doing much, we're not active, then we're just going to sit around and probably eat out of that boredom. So, but it's also interesting, the more active we are, the more need we are. There is a greater need to eat as well, but a lot of times we are just replenishing the calories we burnt at that point. There are a number of factors that are involved in becoming overweight, which is of course a consequence of eating, especially in this culture, in the American culture. We have sort of a problem with eating. I think in our culture, we have a lot of buffets, we have a lot of bad foods around us, we have a lack of good foods. But there are a number of reasons why people are overweight. There are biological factors. There are genetic factors. For example, you inherit it from your parents. Some people have different metabolisms. For some people, it's just harder to lose weight once you put weight on. Your body will literally try to resist that process through a process of adaptive thermogenesis. So it becomes very difficult to keep weight on the more weight we put on. But of course, there are psychological factors as well. The environments we are in play a large part. I mean, if you live in a neighborhood or area of the town where there's not a lot of good foods and all you have is bad foods like fast foods, that's hard. That's hard to lose weight, or it's easy to become overweight then. Lifestyle choices, not being active or being active, impacts obesity. How much stress you have can affect your weight. Experiencing negative emotions can have a very strong impact on your weight. So there are a lot of different factors. Some people like to say, "Oh, it's just willpower. If you want to lose weight, then just have more willpower." If it were only that easy, there are a number of factors that go into it. It's not just as simple as I choose to eat or I choose not to eat. There are much more factors involved at work. And that gets into eating disorders. There are disorders related to our eating patterns, and they become eating disorders when our behaviors become dysfunctional, they are deviant, and they are distressful. They cause us distress. And two that you've probably heard of, the first is anorexia nervosa. This is a condition where people think they have this preoccupation that they are too thin, and they may avoid eating, and to a point where they become malnourished. You can literally die of anorexia because you're depriving your body of nutrients that it needs, and becoming so underfed or malnourished that you can literally die. Bulimia nervosa, on the other hand, is where individuals have a lot of anxiety about their weight, so they'll eat a lot, and then they will attempt to purge that weight through means of laxatives, through excessive exercise, or even inducing vomiting, which I guess I just kind of already talked about. Anorexia nervosa, again, it's this really extreme fear of being overweight, oftentimes is accompanied with dramatic weight loss and a distorted body image. It tends to affect people who are younger and women more so than men. However, a lot of this has to do with our culture. That's a social, that is sort of social pressure at work. Women are pressured socially to be more thin versus males, at least in the American culture, that is the case. Bulimia nervosa, again, it's usually, it is binge eating followed by purging, binging, purging. And again, purging can look like a number of things: vomiting, laxatives, dieting, fasting, all kinds of excessive exercising, things like that. And you can actually see in some cases people who, if they're vomiting, for example, you can start to physically see changes in their teeth because of the vomit. They keep vomiting, and those acids from their vomit will damage their teeth, and that's kind of one of the signs you can tell. But other than that, sometimes people who are bulimic, you can have no idea that they are in fact dealing with bulimia because their weight appears normal, whereas somebody with anorexia, their weight appears very much underweight. Okay, quick comprehension check. The brain structure or structures primarily involved in motivation for sexual behavior are A, the hypothalamus, B, temporal lobes, C, hippocampus, or D, the medulla. Go ahead and pause the video and write your answer down. Okay, welcome back. The correct answer was A, the hypothalamus. It regulates all of our basic needs. Fleeting, fighting, fornicating, all those things we need, we can thank our hypothalamus. Truth or fiction? Another truth or fiction. Fashion magazines can contribute to eating disorders among women. I think we already know the answer to this, but go ahead and pause the video and check your comprehension. The answer is true. Fashion magazines, movies, TV shows, cultural, our culture in general seems to can in some sense promote eating disorders. I think we're starting to become a little more aware of this and starting to kind of push back on it. We're seeing more, for example, women who are even plus size models or women who are normal size women are now being shown in magazines and pop culture and elsewhere. So I still think we have a lot of room to come in that area, but at least we can see the changes taking place positively. Eating disorders are linked to family dynamics, specifically, how things like dieting and eating are discussed in the family. Also, abuse, child abuse. You see eating disorders are more prone in households with child abuse. You see a lot of other issues like depression, anxiety, and so on and so forth. Your climate, the environment you grow up in, the cultural climate matters a lot in terms of like how much does your cultural idealize being fit or being slim or being skinny. That can play a huge impact on the development of eating disorders. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about another thing that motivates people, humans, specifically sex. We're going to, our sexual drive is oftentimes, it is regulated by our sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, that vary in males and females depending on your biological gender. Those things, for example, regulate the development of male and female sex hormones. They also regulate the menstrual cycle for females. And again, these are the things that promote sex drive. They make us feel libido or feel sexual, however you want to say it. And they promote what is known as the sexual response cycle, which was discovered by a man named William Masters in, I think, the 1950s. He studied sex. He studied people having sex. He hooked them up to monitors and monitored their bodies as they went through different changes during sex. And the body undergoes several different stages of change as people are engaging in sex, either by themselves or with another person. Some of those changes include vasocongestion, which is the swelling of the genital tissues, or myotonia. This is, kind of, I hate to say it if you're familiar with this term, but it's a fancy way of saying the O face, the orgasm, the face that people make when they have an orgasm. These are some of the things that are going on when people are having sex. And so you have you have 4 phases. You have the excitement phase, men and women for both. You experience, erection in men, vaginal lubrication with females. When things start to get a little hot and heavy, they go into the plateau phase where there is increase in vasocongestion, muscle tension, heart rate, blood pressure, everything is up. The testes are now in place for preparation for ejaculation. Then we are in the orgasmic phase, which of course is when an orgasm happens. This is when ejaculation happens. Followed by a resolution phase, which for men means they enter a refractory period where orgasm is not possible again, at least for a few minutes or a few moments, however long it takes. And then women, of course, this isn't the case for women. They can again be re-aroused. So a little bit different there for men and women. But this is something that your body goes through, again, when you're experiencing sex, whether by yourself or with another person. This is something we all experience during sex. Here are some trends on teenage sex. We can see kind of the trend shows some growth, at least for a while, then sort of a steady decrease, kind of high up here, and then a decrease, a trend towards decrease. We see that largely, I think the literature even beyond 2010 suggests that, unmarried boys and girls are having sex at least with less frequency than before, than at least, the previous decades. Sexual orientation is another part of, our discussion on sex. It's essentially, where do you direct your romantic or your sexual interests to? People who are homosexual, of course, are attracted to the same biological gender. People who are heterosexual are attracted to the opposite biological gender. And people, of course, who are bisexual are attracted to both genders, or both biological genders in this case. And again, I'm being very careful with this word, biological gender. I know there's a little more nuance than just male, female, and so I'm not trying to step on toes there. I'm just trying to give you sort of the strictest definitions here. But I love this little line at the end. I don't know why they decided to include it, but bisexuals and how they describe bisexuals is with Miley Cyrus. If you didn't know, Miley Cyrus is a bisexual. I love how just matter-of-factly that is put in there, and that's it. There's really no, I mean, it doesn't really add a whole lot to the discussion at all, but it's just a nice fact to know. Of course, sexual orientation. One thing I want to express, it's not in the PowerPoint, but I think it needs to be expressed, is that sexual orientation, whether you are homosexual, heterosexual, or bisexual, is not the result of choice. People who are gay, people who are lesbian, people who are heterosexual, bisexual, they do not actively make a choice. Like, they don't sit down one day and make a pro and cons column and decide, well, I'm going to be gay, or I'm going to be straight, or I'm going to be bisexual. That's not how it works. Most of the literature and most of the research is suggesting some genetic components, some hormone components, but there is no way, shape, or form a choice involved. People can choose to maybe hide their sexual orientation. That's of course a choice, but people do not choose openly decide, oh, I'm gay or I'm straight. Gender identity is another one of those things we are starting to see that it is separate. Your gender identity is separate from your biological sex. Your sex is what you are born with, but gender identity starts to get into things beyond just male, female. We also start to see that there are some gradients in between. It's not just black or white, one or the other. We have transgender as well. So we're starting to also see a much more greater degree of gender nonconformity, where males and females are engaging in behaviors that are sort of non-stereotypical for their gender. And that's pretty cool, I think. And so again, probable causes of homosexuality, oftentimes it's linked to genetics, it's linked to sex hormones, but again, we do not see the word choice here at all. So we can strike that from our minds once and for all. Last thing we're going to talk about is achievement motivation, the motivation to succeed, the motivation to achieve goals, to accomplish things. It's a very powerful motivator. You're probably listening to this video right now because you have high achievement motivation. You want to do better for yourselves. And one of the ways that psychologists test this is through a test known as the thematic apperception test, where you show a picture, a scene, and essentially the person viewing the picture of the scene has to describe what they are seeing, and based upon how they describe, we can get at maybe what their motivations are. So here is an example. Let me show you. This would be an example of a TAT item. You would look at this picture and you would describe all the things in the video, the picture that you see, and that is supposed to be a kind of a window into your mind. Oftentimes our goals in terms of achievement can be broken down into extrinsic versus intrinsic rewards. Sometimes, we have achievement motivation for making more money. Like, I want to get a better promotion and make more money at my job. And that's great. That's an extrinsic motivator. That is outside of yourself. Whereas an intrinsic motivator would be, I'm motivated for its own sake. So I'm motivated to achieve at my job for its own sake, or I'm motivated to achieve in school because I want to feel good about myself. I don't care about the rewards necessarily. I just want to feel good about myself internally. That would be an example of an intrinsic reward. Okay, so we're going to stop here. I feel like I just threw a lot at you with Chapter 8, but we're going to stop here, and when we pick back up, we will finish Chapter 8, and we'll look at emotion. So that's it for Chapter 8.1. Let's pick up with 8.2 in the next video.